Hello, and welcome back to the Heal with Grace podcast. I'm excited for our guest today. We have Mike Williams, who is a pain reprocessing therapist, Hakomi practitioner, and rolfer who specializes in helping his clients move skillfully through challenges at the crossroads of chronic pain and personal growth using somatic psychology, mindfulness, and neuroscience based techniques. Mike has helped people embody safety and ease physically, mentally, and emotionally and solve chronic pain since 2008. Prior to that, he had a 10-year career in investment banking and corporate finance and spent 2 years as a Lake Tahoe ski bum. His private practice is located in Austin, Texas, and online with clients nationwide. This is another really nourishing conversation to help you understand the connection between our pain and the psycho and emotional connection. So, what's going on in the mind, what's going on emotionally that connects to our physical body with pain. Mike is really skillful at talking about this and sharing examples of how this happens with his clients and in general. And I'm really excited to have him on here. And I hope that you enjoy. Hello, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Hey, Grace, it's a pleasure to meet you and to be here today. I've been really looking forward to it.
Cool. Well, let's go ahead and just jump in and tell our audience a little bit about you, how you came to specialize in this work. There's always a story behind it, so I'm
Absolutely,
curious.
absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those life stories, so I'll try to be succinct for sure. But this is my second career that I'm in. I actually began my professional life in investment banking and finance out of college for about a decade. And that was, ultimately not speaking to the parts of me that wanted to contribute and do something that felt, deeply meaningful. And so there's the cat biting. Um, so I, like many people, I think in these fields, I began a search for, what would feel impactful for me. And I didn't know it at the time, but where I was really referencing and calling back on was, a lot from my childhood and growing up with two parents that had chronic pain and chronic health challenges. And what I had, I think, taken on, of course, unbeknownst to me as a young person, as a real desire to want people to feel more empowered around their health and chronic challenges. I was mainly fortunate to not have to navigate these myself, but I lived them in many ways through my family system and through my parents' experience. So as I transitioned from finance and kind of this long journey to figure out like what's my why and what do I really want to do when I grow up, I started out initially opening up private practice as a rolfer, which is a type of structural body work, which you may be familiar with in the Boulder area. That's kind of the hub for rolfing up there.
Mhm.
And I dove into that practice working 95% with people that had chronic pain issues. After a couple years and really getting my experience under my belt, working with clients, what I began to become more aware of with my clients was the maybe often fleeting nature of improvement with kind of structural focused work. Um, and so I remember very clearly a couple times having these great sessions with folks. Their bodies would shift noticeably, like we'd each recognize, like, wow, there's some really good improvement here. They would report, like, I feel so much better. And then I would watch them walk down the hall to leave, and you could see their bodies just kind of put the stuff back on. Whether it was postural habits, personality kind of traits that get embodied, things like that, that kind of been the way they walked in the door. So that sent me down the rabbit hole, I guess, of really getting curious about the psycho-emotional realms and how those were, like the software, I guess, is kind of how I've referred to them often with my clients, underneath the hardware of what was going on in their bodies around their chronic pain. So then I began this long study of Hakomi, which is a mindfulness-based somatic psychology method, studying and training in that for years and ultimately becoming certified as a Hakomi practitioner. And then as I began to blend that and those types of mindfulness driven explorations with my clients in my rolfing practice, I kind of spontaneously, with my clients, came across this connectivity between emotional fields or experiences and the pain that was unfolding in the body. So, what happened with many of my clients was the thing that hurt that surely must be just something wrong with my neck or traps or back um, began to illuminate deeper challenges going on in their lives, whether it was a relational challenge, something about their career path, which I, of course, could resonate with from my own experience, or any number of other life path kind of challenges. So I feel like in many ways I stumbled a little blindly into a lot of the principles underneath pain reprocessing therapy, but I had no clue about PRT. And then a few years back, I came across Alan Gordon's book and I read it and I was like, oh, this. And that, I'm now a PRT practitioner. And that really gave me this amazing framework for, not only, okay, what is happening here at a neuroscientific level, but also gave me a lot greater language and understanding about the neuroscience of chronic pain, which I didn't have any clue about before working with my clients. So
Mm.
that was just, that I think that PRT training kind of put the cherry on top of a lot of the work that I'd been kind of formulating and co-creating with my clients for years.
You put it all together. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
in many
interesting.
ways. Yeah,
It's also interesting you talk about, growing up with parents with that went through a lot of these issues.
absolutely.
Because you see it, you feel it, you probably hear about pain all the time. I actually as well, both of my parents, multiple different issues,
Okay.
lots of pain. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
just, what I knew. We always had health stuff in our house and
Yeah,
I took it on. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, it's definitely can be a learned pattern too.
absolutely. And, it's the ways that that kind of experience becomes the water that you're
Mm-hmm.
growing up in, right? And the way that you formulate your own relationship to others and to self through that modeling
Yeah.
and experience. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. So tell us a little bit more about what Hakomi is. I keep hearing
Yeah,
really wonderful things about it.
the name technically is Hakomi Mindful Somatic Psychology, and it's really what it sounds like. It's a body-based psychology practice, meaning it's looking to understand what are the psycho-emotional challenges as they live through the
Mm,
soma or the body, and that's kind of the way that a Hakomi practitioner or therapist will explore whatever challenges are going on for a client. It's through the lens of what's happening in this present moment that you can track, whether it's a felt experience in your body and your emotions. How does the thought or memory or imagined space mentally kind of show up here, in the body as we are in conversation. Mindfulness is the main tool with which we work. Not as the goal of using it in order to say relax,
mm,
or for stress relief, but in order to open the doorway into slowing down and being able to really skillfully self-reflect in the
mm,
moment and moment to moment to moment about, okay, well, what's happening now and how can we deepen into that experience as a Hakomi practitioner works with their clients. We're often looking at maybe a specific challenge they want to work with. Of course, pain is, the one that I mainly focus on with my clients. And we're studying and learning how is the meaning making systems of this person constructed.
mm,
What challenges are very often habitually or subconsciously there that they can't see until they are able to slow down and really feel and experience live in the moment. And when we come across those challenged places, how can we explore a really an experiential way together so that they can take it out into the world and try new things to move through those spaces that might be sticky, stuck, painful, whether that's painful physically or
mm.
otherwise, non-physically.
It sounds, when you said slow down and start to recognize, right? I mean, I talk about that all the time on here. We
Yeah, yeah,
cannot understand what's going on if we're not slowing down. And usually, when our nervous systems are in such a state of stress, it's hard to do that, right?
Yeah.
So, can you give an example of what that might look like in terms of what would someone do to help to apply this practice, whether that's to themselves or a practitioner? How would this work?
Right. Like a live kind of client story I can share if that's
Sure.
useful.
Yeah.
Right. So this would be, with a practitioner, I tend to find that these things are always easier,
Yeah.
although there's certainly some self work available, but, very often you're getting into these subconscious layers of ourselves, and it's like the fish not knowing it's in water. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
hard to see that water from within without the help initially. But a few years ago, I had, as just an example, I had a client who actually came in to see me for Rolfing
Mm.
for very like intentionally structural for chronic neck and shoulder pain, something that, many, many people experience, especially in the professional world. They had tried all the things, all the biomedical things, Rolfing previously too, physical therapy, corticosteroid injections, getting screened for any injury, things of that nature. And, after years of trying, just nothing was really clicking for this person. Um, because they were coming in for Rolfing, we began there, and it was, very much a structurally oriented beginning. But what became clear through our conversation pretty quickly, this person was just very skillful in their ability to, tune in and report what was going on. It became clear to me like I think there's something else kind of going on. So after our first session, doing body work had, decent in the moment benefit, didn't last, kind of a pretty typical story. So I proposed doing Hakomi work to go a little deeper to see if there was something more in the emotional or psychological realms that might be working in the software or underneath the surface. Um, and so we just began with tuning this person in mindfully to slow down. Let's explore the pain, and let's get to know, how it is unfolding in this moment in their body. Right? It's very kind of typical beginning for Hakomi. At some point there, I had some information about some of the challenges in their life around work, particularly for this individual, and just their relationship to work in general. And so in Hakomi, as you deepen, we'll do what's often referred to as experiments in mindfulness, where we want to offer some sort of kind and potentially nourishing prompt of some sort. It might be words, it might be movement, it might be physical contact if you're in proximity, right? Could be a creative visualization. The idea is it's meant to illuminate some deeper layers of subconscious information um, in that moment that might spontaneously come up and give us some clues about what's going on. So with this person, while we were in mindfulness, I offered this experiment. It was just these very simple, kind words, with, the idea like, hey, just you don't need to take this on, just see what naturally responds in your system. And I offered her the words, it's okay to rest, which in theory is a very nice thing to hear,
Mhm.
right? It could potentially be very nourishing. But in this person's system, what happened spontaneously was just like this, like, no, like this really resistant tension in the body. The pain completely spiked and amplified in their body. And like the words in their head were like, no way. And so, right there through the Hakomi lens, you're on to what's known as like a barrier to something that might be nourishing. Like this whole notion of like, is rest might be nourishing for you, and something was constructed in their system that made the idea unsafe or not possible, in that moment, right? So then for us it was just very clear, like, okay, this is not a physical body thing. So the work then unfolds toward understanding, there's something in here keeping rest at bay, and it's important, right? It's not a bad thing, right? Most likely it was constructed by a younger version of this person who was trying to get through their world skillfully. And so, first we're learning to understand how does that challenge with rest show up in their system, mentally, physically, emotionally, and then how can we experiment together with opening up the door in some new way to, rest might possibly be okay, right? And that's kind of like this deepening process into the psycho-emotional realms, the subconscious realms that Hakomi is really good at. This for this person, it became very connected not just to like rest, but also a particular relationship professionally that
Mm.
was challenging, boundary setting, in their lives, in relationship, things of that nature. And through finding ways through those challenges, the pain resolved, and those challenges became much more reachable and easier to step through in their lives.
So what I'm and tell me if this is if I'm on track is that
Yeah, of
part of the process, and I'm using different words, but is to
course.
help to understand what is activating, right, on a psychological, emotional level. And so you're experimenting with them to figure out what is activating, like rest is activating, or certain things in life is activating, which would increase
Yeah,
the pain, right?
yeah.
And then on the other side of that, we talk about using or establishing safety, like in the body with PRT. So then what does that look like within a session and helping people understand how to establish that safety with themselves as they're recognizing what's activating?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I often use the words, I don't know that this is specific Hakomi language, but you mentioned safety as an
Hmm.
example. And for this person, the idea like of being able to rest seems logical. And that might help their body, lower the signal in their nervous system on the pain. But it was very unsafe to do so. And it's not as simple or black and white as like, well, just take a vacation or quit your job, or
Hmm.
something like really, really big. And so it's very iterative that we're working together. Like, well, how much is digestible in your nervous system, right? How much can you integrate? So, for folks, I come from a probably what I would call like a very type A background, having been in investment banking. And so
Mm.
I tend to work with a lot of type A type folks. If type A is even used these days, I don't know if it is, but
Hmm.
um, the experimenting together became looking for like what's the right sized window. And sometimes it starts like, okay, for the next like 2 minutes, like it's okay to just like totally not do. And even that can be really challenging for
Hmm.
folks, right? Or unsafe, right? So things like really trying to find the nuance of what's the right window for this person to establish safety or ease, centeredness in their nervous systems. I think Hakomi is really skillful at finding those right doors in that way.
Yeah. You're right in that I think a lot of times it is kind of misunderstood when we talk about safety or rest. I mean, I think rest is a big one for a lot of
Yeah,
people. It's really hard to do that for so many reasons, right? We've either learned
of
that, we
course.
lived in society that perpetuates type A behavior and go, go, go.
Yeah,
And it's not okay to do that because then we're not enough. And so, yeah, I like that idea or that example of sometimes it's just 2 minutes of allowing yourself to just be and rest in this moment, right? Because
right.
it's not going to feel safe to be like, go take a week off and do nothing. Like that doesn't work, right? Or that's not
So
sustainable.
big. Well, it's
Yeah.
so big for a lot of folks. It's
Hmm.
just an idea, or even taking a day.
Okay. So something came up as you were talking,
Mm,
and through really just the whole modality that you work in.
mm.
Do you recognize, or what's the word? Do you approach and maybe bring to people the different centers of the body associated with certain emotions or beliefs?
Can you elaborate a little more
Yeah,
on what you
so,
mean? Yeah, help me out.
maybe it's more of maybe it might be more in the back of your mind when you're working with
Sure.
someone, but, you know how there's certain emotional centers of the body, that
Hmm.
associate with certain structural centers of the body, that's probably a better way of saying it,
Yeah,
right? Like, maybe that's associated with the chakra system, maybe that's associated
got it.
with whatever that might be. Does that inform your work with where you go with someone? I just thought of that as you were talking about kinda tracking the body.
It's a great question, and I get a lot of folks that come in that have exposure or even practices related
Mm, okay.
to areas of work like that, whether it's maybe a yoga practice or
Mhm,
a shamanic type practice or something else.
mhm,
The way I try to approach this work is a little belief agnostic, right? Because for some folks that's not how their meaning making systems organize.
for sure.
And so, I don't try to, and I think it might hit resistance if you try to infer that with certain folks. Now,
Mm,
if it works for others and it's, the way they've kind of constructed meaning in their body and psyches, I have, chakra systems that feel, potent or not potent. That can weave really well into the work because you are going uh, into an exploration of that particular person's belief
mhm,
set, how their body and psyche respond to different prompts and experiences. And so
mhm.
if those things come out, then it can be very rich exploration, but it's not like a requirement, say, or it's not
Mhm.
necessarily a specific model of the work
Yeah, for
to
sure.
do those maps, right?
Yeah. And I actually
Um,
appreciate you saying that because
yeah,
everyone is different, right? Everyone has a different association with their emotions or their pain or their belief systems in
yeah,
life. Their experience shapes that, right? And I think sometimes I see with a lot of people that they learn about someone's story or experience and they're like, oh, that's really similar to mine, right? And then they might try to take on that type of healing protocol or try to change their belief system the way that that person did. And it doesn't always fit that way.
yeah,
Um, right. So,
yeah,
yeah, I think that's an important thing to note.
yeah. And I can definitely resonate with that experimenting, right?
Mm,
When I was
hmm
first approaching these different fields, especially coming from a very analytical, cognitive kind
mm,
of business, and moving into what all of my colleagues and friends from that field thought was really woo woo. um, I did a lot of my own, like, ooh, this is very interesting. I'm going to kind of take this on and try it on.
mm,
And some worked and some didn't. And some worked for a while and then stopped working. And I think that's like a great part of the exploration, actually,
mm,
for folks that are, diving into these, healing arts, healing type paths,
mhm.
if things speak to them.
Yeah, I think that's true too. Because a lot of times we don't have the language or we don't have the idea, right? It's the same thing
Yeah.
as like the feelings wheel. Like if we can't understand and
Mm,
identify our feelings, we need to
right.
maybe look at something to help us.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we need suggestions sometimes. But I think trying it on and experimenting is the important part, not trying to make it fit. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like to think, and this is straight out of Hakomi, and I know I'm like very Hakomi centric in my
mhm.
conversation now, but it really feels like a big part of who I am and how I practice for sure. But there's this whole notion of just having an experimental mindset. Can you be open, try things out, literally take in the information, get the data, get the feedback, and then see like yes, no, maybe more, and keep kind of moving down your path in that way. And I just have always loved that. It's embracing of a lot of different experience. It's very forgiving of having hits and misses along the way. I really love it.
I Yeah, and I think it's so important for this population because we know we have a lot of people that are type A that like want to grab onto
Mm,
something that need that control and
mhm.
want something to be right off the bat, and that's not often how this works. And if we can come at it from a place of curiosity and experimentation, I mean, it's such a big part of this journey. So I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it speaks also directly to, if we lean into PRT principles, like
hmm
the notion of being open and curious about like, well, what's happening
hmm
now, rather than having like a must or a rigidity around whatever the experience might be.
hmm Yeah, that's been a big part of my learning experience because I wanted to,
Mm,
get it right. And oh, the pain went away. Okay, cool. I'm fixed, right? Or like I'm good and
right.
never is going to happen before. And then when it popped up, I was like, what am I doing wrong? Instead of okay, what is this? What's going on here?
Yeah, what's
Um,
the next layer, right?
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yes. I'm really interested in Hakomi now, I have to say. I think it's
You're
like it's coming to me at the right time.
awesome. You're also located in like one of the hubs, so it's very Colorado centric.
There's so much here. It's so much rich healing modalities and principles and people and wanting to learn. It's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, when we were talking before this, you mentioned, and you might have talked about it without naming it, so just let me know. But we talked about, or you talked about the idea of a character strategy and kind of making
Mm,
meaning or maybe stories around something. Can
yeah,
you explain a little bit more about what that is? Because I thought it was
absolutely.
something interesting I wanted to learn about.
Yeah, so I teased it a little bit with my
Hmm.
client story, but didn't like pull it
Okay.
out explicitly. So I'm glad you asked. So the idea of character strategy in Hakomi is that, uh, and I'm sure this is a model that parallels many other bodies of work, but it's through our natural child and young adult development, we encounter all of us, these major existential challenges, right? Like just some base human experiences that we all need to negotiate. And sometimes we have support for those, and sometimes we don't, right? And they're the big bucket things like safety and getting our needs met and feeling like we can authentically express who we are and having a sense of self-worth, the kind of the big
Mhm.
things. And there are absolutely cases where we have abuse and outright neglect around certain of those, and trauma around certain of those challenges. And there are also times where we just had a caregiver who missed us in a moment that we just really needed it, and it wasn't because they were being purposefully neglectful. It might have been like, mom was sick that day, and something was sticky about that challenge in that moment that I didn't have help navigating. Naturally, we come to experiment around those times about like, well, how can I get this need met? This challenge, how can I overcome it? And there's hit and misses there, of course, just like any new thing we're experiencing. But the ones that are successful, they tend to be kind of rerun through our system. Like, somewhere inside of us, we're like, oh, it worked this way. And so we do it again and again, and it becomes a most often subconscious habit set in our systems. Leaning on my previous client example, like in that case, the character strategy challenge might have been around that idea of self-worth. And the strategy that got enacted subconsciously was along the lines of, well, it's better not to really rest, because something about productivity proves out my value to myself, maybe, and maybe to others as well. Right. So the explorations within this body of work often kind of lead down into like, well, what's the strategy, the subconscious strategy that's trying to work itself out? And the important things to understand here are these were good ones, right? It was something that we crafted, some younger version of ourselves, and time. And so they're innately, as I always like to tell my clients, they're always innately good at their core, right? They helped us get through a challenge, and we're here today to scrutinize them or explore them as a result. But they just might be past their expiration date, or they're resulting now today in some challenge that we're not happy with, whether it's chronic pain, right, or another chronic type ailment, or certain ways of being in relationship, or certain ways of walking the career path, or certain ways of making meaning in the world, right? And those are, in cases where people aren't navigating chronic pain, those are often the things that take them into a counseling or therapy kind of environment as well. So the exploration there is, again, like, okay, well, what purpose is this serving, from a lens of compassion and openness? And then it's trying to get a need met, whether it's safety or self-worth or nourishment in some way. And what is a more up-to-date way that we can help that part of you get that need met? In that case, going back to my client, it was like starting with like the 2 minutes of rest, say, like to begin to prove out over and over to that part of the nervous system that it's actually okay to rest. And that doesn't change, who you are or what kind of value you have, right? And expanding that over time.
Yeah. So the idea is that the pain, for instance, if it's chronic pain, is letting us know there's a certain need unmet that it's essentially asking us to understand and to give. Is that right? Is that the idea?
Potentially, yeah.
Somewhat.
There's if there's some connectivity from the pain to the psycho-emotional, right? I don't
Mm.
want to presume that all pain has some psychological need,
Hmm.
right? But when those explorations kind of work their way to like, oh, I'm evoked in this scenario,
Mm.
right? And that's what's creating the pain. Say, like, okay, well, what's that? What's evoking that?
Mm.
Stress, strain, nervous system activity.
And using curiosity with that, just to bring that back, is, I'm
Thank you.
assuming, so important because I can already.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're bringing this up because I think it's really important to understand that, um, in terms of these scenarios with pain that keeps coming up, and we can track them to, something like your client, like career, um, and the need for rest, that I've noticed sometimes, and myself included, I would be like, almost guilt or shame would come up because, "Oh, I need that." Right? It feels needy. Does it feel, it
Right.
feels wrong? Or maybe, how did I get here to that I need this and I never really got that or gave it to myself or whatever it might be. Because there's sometimes with the need with chronic illness or pain, there's sometimes, I say sometimes, because not everyone,
Yeah.
but sometimes,
Yeah.
we track it down to like, actually, it's helping you feel seen and connected by people by getting taken care of, right? And that can sometimes
Right.
feel a little like, ooh, scary to people because
Yeah.
it can feel like I'm being needy, like it's a bad thing. But it's not. So that's where my brain went. So when you were talking, and that it's just important to understand this instead of it be like, oh yeah, you have to have this, this, and this.
I think what you're saying, Grace, is such an important thing because it's really an easy place to get judgmental
Hmm.
or self-critical about like, ooh, I don't like that I'm doing this or that this is a part of me or whatever it might be. And that's where, I'm forever trying to encourage my clients to remember like, you crafted this a long time ago. And, maybe even as a little kid.
Hmm.
And that little kid is sweet and we really value him or her, right? And what they're trying to do. And, so we first want to start with, compassion for that, that part of self. And including like, and you're ready, obviously, for something new. And how can we help you find that? Like bridge that gap. But yeah, that's definitely a place where that curiosity and compassion become really, really important.
Yeah.
Um, because it can be really, really frustrating to feel, say, needy. Like, oh, there's a part of me that I'm noticing now as being really needy or something. It's like even saying those words, it doesn't feel good, right?
Hmm.
And um, so it's a tricky space, but an important one,
Yeah. And
to learn how to be with.
exactly. And I mean, being human, we have needs. That's we
Right.
for so many things. That's just normal, right?
Yeah.
But there's
Yeah.
been, I think, sometimes learned patterns where we feel like that's not right or good enough or something along those lines.
Yeah, yeah. In our initial email exchange prior to scheduling this, I mentioned to you like a client that what was underneath their pain was this like self-reliance that it was really scary to ask for help.
Mm,
And so there was like exactly what you're saying. It's like I have a need that I can't self-reliant my way through. And that's creating like a lot of intense kind of undercurrent that was fueling the pain.
Is there anything else around some of the themes that we've talked about specific to Hakomi or just working through chronic pain
Mm.
that you feel like we haven't touched on that would be important?
Well, I think, you know, I think what's important to know is, you know, when I have clients that approach me, say for PRT, I sometimes get the question like, am I going to need to do deeper work? Am I going to need to go explore my psycho-emotional subconscious? And um, what I've found to be mainly true is not necessarily, right? Like sometimes the PRT tools themselves, like, building in safety, somatic tracking, doing some gradual exposure, right? And getting really aware of the science so the cognitive pieces kind of fit into place a little better. Sometimes that's really enough for folks. And it doesn't require like this big excavation of, their lives. And then for others, when things get a little sticky in, the success or lack of success with just the PRT tools themselves, there's a good opportunity there to dig a little deeper into those other layers, right? And it doesn't even necessarily mean like, okay, now we have to go revisit all the aspects of your childhood that, X, Y, or Z. It can be sometimes, very succinct and elegant, and not, forever kind of digging through things,
Yeah, I
right?
appreciate you saying that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's very true. And again, we're all different. We have different journeys and experiences. And I think
absolutely.
also what I've seen is that sometimes you're right, some of those tools specifically with PRT really do work. And then there might be a few years later where things pop up and maybe that's the time to go a little more because that's what your
Yeah,
body's asking for. It's what your life can allow at that time. So I do think time and where you are and experience I've seen just it matters, you know?
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then I think, even as you're saying that, like there's like this little postscript I want to add, which is, it's also if it becomes right or apparent that it's important to dig deeper, it's not always about some big cathartic,
Mm.
unraveling of things, right? Which is a little bit in the field right now too, right? With other types of healing modalities. And that's not always necessary. In fact, it doesn't necessarily integrate well to try to like reach for catharsis, right? So it's
Mhm.
that kind of skillful, like what's just enough right now, what's just enough, and then just enough again that I can really integrate and take on as new. That's way more potent than like I need to detonate everything.
Thank you. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
That's so important because we don't it can be too overwhelming for your system if you try to go and dig for
yep,
something and it doesn't really make sense in that way. So for everyone, yeah,
absolutely,
that
absolutely.
was very, very important. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful
Mm,
conversation.
yeah, you're welcome. What a pleasure.
Yeah. What do you do right now? Where do you work? How do people
Mm.
find you?
Yeah, so my home base is in Austin, Texas, but I mainly work virtual. So I have clients, of course, many centered around Central Texas, but often around the country and occasionally internationally. Someone finds me, which is fun and interesting.
Mm,
Um, People can generally find me. The best way is website, which is somamike.com, SOMAMIKE.com. More or less out there on socials, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Soma Mike Williams is my handle for those.
cool. And we'll have all those
Yeah,
linked. Um,
awesome.
just a simple, curious question. How is Austin these days?
Well, today it's rainy and gray, and
Hmm.
last week, we're recording this and it's still winter technically, but last week was like almost 90 degrees. So, we get that. It's fun. It's hot sometimes. It's rainy other times.
Hmm.
It's a good city.
Yeah. All right, Mike. And again, yeah, everything for your information will be linked below. Again, thank you so much. These principles are, I mean, just So, so important for people to understand and to feel validated. And I think some of the
Yeah,
messages that we had today. So, thank you again.
you're welcome. I hope it was really helpful for your folks.
Definitely.